Hello and welcome back to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today, my guest is Jeff Standridge. He's the Managing Director of Innovation Junkie and the Managing Partner of Cadron Capital Partners. Jeff, welcome.
Great to be here, Marcus. I appreciate you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Today, we're going to look at some really meaty and visceral topics. I want the audience to prime themselves for an uncomfortable ride. Our objective is to hold up the ugly mirror and to present better alternatives, to recognize the contribution that you are playing or making to the outcomes you do not want. One of my favorite lessons I got from one of my coaches when I was whining and complaining about how hard done by I was, well, Marcus, your business is perfectly designed today to deliver precisely the results that you're getting.
Exactly.
At which point I started to respond with, well, I haven't designed, and then the lesson landed. Today is going to be one of those sessions. Okay.
Love it.
We're going to unpick the stuff that you do that hurts you. You're going to look at what you're really the outcome you're trying to achieve, what's not working. Stop doing that thing. Free up time, money, resource, budget, and bandwidth. Work out what works, improve it, test it, and when you've proven it and tested it, scale it. Don't do it the other way around.
That's right.
Which, as an investor, you've probably seen over the last 35 years or so, people putting the cart before the horse. So let's start with that. What are the top 3 blind spots that you see founders and owners and CEOs suffering from, especially as they go into a very difficult and uncertain trading period?
Yeah, that's so the first one that I see is creating a product or a service that no one wants or that they haven't effectively tested in the market. They've not performed any customer discovery. They've fallen in love with their idea. And oh, by the way, it can be a product or a service for the market, or it can be a new change initiative in their organization. Someone gets a great idea. They say, wouldn't it be great if that everyone rallies around that idea and they go headstrong into implementation before they've really done any product market fit, real win-worth analysis, or determined what's going to be the return on the effort to implement this within our organization.
Okay, so summarize, believing their own rhetoric.
That's right.
Falling in love with their own idea, thinking that anyone else cares about their ugly baby, and also testing the water with both feet.
That's
Don't
right.
do any of those things. If you are doing those things or you're about to do those things, Jeff, what is your advice to them?
Well, to step back and pause for a moment and forget about the idea and ask yourself the question, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's the impact of this problem? How big is it? And what's going to be required? What's going to be the cost of a solution? And how do those things compare? When I say they build a product or a service that no one wants, what I'm really saying there is they build a product or a service that not enough people will buy at the price point required for it to be a profitable ongoing concern. In the case of an organizational initiative, it's not going to have enough impact on the outcomes of the company to warrant the level of effort required to make it happen.
Often that is the case, and there are a couple of wonderful examples. The cucumber cover, a lovely guy called Rourke McMaster did on Dragon's Den, which is our equivalent of Shark Tank. And it was a problem that didn't really exist because all you have to do is just cut the wrinkly end off. And you see this time and again. My pal, Jerry Lemberg, who died about 10 years ago, sadly, and he said that entrepreneurs are people who create elegant solutions to problems that don't exist. Just because you think they do doesn't mean they do. You need to go and speak to actual customers.
That's right.
And ask them for money. Ask them for a commitment. If you don't have a product, ask them to help you design the product and then test it by speaking to other customers that you're hoping to displace.
Yeah, and I would suggest you even start before that. So even upstream from there, go and talk to some of those customers with some well-crafted customer discovery questions that don't create confirmation bias, that don't lead the witness toward the outcome that you're hoping to hear, and say, and if in asking these open-ended, unbiased questions, they don't mention the problem or don't
Mhm.
even refer in any way to the problem you've identified, maybe you need to step back and rethink it a little bit.
And this is not the time to make a captain's call and decide that you know better than your customers.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I've seen specialists, knowledge specialists do that. For instance, I work with physician inventors, physician researchers, or PhD researchers who have an idea, and I've suggested that they go do some customer discovery, and invariably it's, I don't need to do customer discovery. I know what's needed in this industry. I know what's needed in this particular situation.
So, again, let me just reinforce this point. You exist for only one reason, because of the customer.
That's right.
You don't exist in spite of them, you
That's right.
exist because of them. Our job is one thing and one thing only, which is actually leadership, which is
Hmm.
to empower the customer to make the right decision,
Hmm.
not the wrong decision, not the right decision badly, and not the right decision for our reasons, not their reasons,
Correct.
because that will backfire. And then they will
Always.
have legitimate reason to blame us.
That's right.
So, what I see time and time again is founders, owners, investors, boards convinced of their own argument, and they're
Hmm.
not spending enough time listening. So I'm going to take your argument even further. And what I would suggest is that people, if you record your customer success or customer complaints or whatever your version of that is, if you record those calls, go back and listen to those calls. Have the person who owns the responsibility for those calls to pull a montage of voices together of the customer, both good and bad, the experience they have. I mention it on almost every episode because it is so enlightening. In the
Hmm.
US healthcare sector, 24% of inbound inquiries to sales agents have been coming in for years because people were struggling to buy the thing they want to buy on the website. That's 2 hours in every agent's day lost helping people do something that the website is meant to do, the job to be done. And it doesn't
That's
do.
right. That's right.
So very often, we need to do as leaders is not only ask the question, what is the job to be done, but what is not working in terms of creating hindrance, resistance, perception of risk? How can we replace that by stop doing it, outsource it, automate it, delegate it properly so someone whose value is equal to the job is doing it. And for them, it's a career advancement.
Yeah.
So instead of abdicating, we delegate.
Agreed. An illustrative point of that leadership decision to stop doing things. Early in my leadership career, I inherited this data management and internal technology organization in a tech company. Interestingly, the lady that I had working for me, every day she came into her office and had 100 requests in her inbox for custom reports of data, and she was just about to lose her mind. And I said, "Here's what I want you to do. I want you to delete your inbox, delete every single request, all the backlog. I want you to just delete them. And then I want you to keep very, very clear records of what gets asked for
Mhm.
from your customers, and what type of report it is." And so we did that for about a month. And oh, by the way, about
Mhm.
80% of the requests that she deleted never came back to her for another request. It was just
Okay, good.
it was a crutch that they had created. It was a nice to have, but not something they were going to make business decisions on. And the other 20% of the request, we were able to figure out standard reports for about 80% of those, and create custom automated reports that would occur that could be delivered on a regular basis. And we changed her workload and her quality of life, work life, in the same fail swoop of decisions.
And how much more value per employee on hour did she contribute?
Oh, significantly greater.
Would you say it was 2x, 5x, 10x per hour?
10x, 10x easily.
Whilst you 10x her value contribution,
Uh-huh.
Because she was not now a bottleneck and stuff was getting done and you were learning stuff, how did that improve your ability to do your job or her line manager's ability to get the job done?
Oh, it increased it considerably. I mean, her line manager didn't have to deal with helping her sort through requests every day. I went from having a problem that had been in existence for years to having zero problems associated with it. So I ended up not having to spend any time with her on that at all.
And how much was the problem costing the business prior to addressing it in the way you did by just stopping doing it?
Oh gosh, if I were to think back, this was back years ago, but I would say it would be multiple six figures.
Okay. So again, I'm so glad that you said this because this really illustrates the point. The first thing we do is we ask the question, what are we trying to accomplish? What's the delta between what we want to achieve and where we are? From X to Y by when is the target,
That's
but
right.
the delta between where we're headed on the default future and our ideal future. I'm a big fan of going for the ideal future as the baseline. What do we have to do to be able to achieve that ideal future within 8 contracted hours
Hmm.
for the employee
Hmm.
and for them to be without stress and to be able to do an excellent job for every hour they are there? Because what my experience is, and the data tells us that the average salesperson is maybe close to 25% productive in
Hmm.
any given working day. So
Hmm.
that means you pay for 8 hours and you get 2 hours.
Correct.
Yeah. But
Hmm.
they probably work 10, 12, 16.
Hmm.
That to me is a massive opportunity for upside, not only to drive performance and improve retention, but also to turn the middle management layer into a catalyst.
So you bring that's a great point. I led a sales organization various times in my career, and what I was hearing from my sales team in one particular instance was all of the bureaucratic organizational sales stopping activity that was occurring within the organization. I told our general counsel one time that every time I turned the corner, I had a one of his attorneys trying to throw their limp, lifeless body in front of a deal. And so we ended up doing a sales velocity initiative, kind of a study. And I had all of my salespeople, probably about 50 salespeople, and I had them actually time track, look at their time. Where were they spending their time? And we
Yep.
categorized it into preparatory selling activity, actual client facing selling activity, actual compliance activity to make the deal happen, and all other administrative activity that had nothing to do with sales. And they were spending 75% of their time on the last category, the requirements of which were owned by a parallel organization, a
Mhm.
delivery organization, for instance, right?
Yep.
Or a customer
Out
service
of your control.
out of my control, completely out of my control. And so then I sat down and started quantifying that. What was the actual cost in terms of the time and of the people involved? But then what was the opportunity cost, really calculating against their actual individual quotas?
What was the effect, though? What was the impact of that? Because I can't wait to hear the data
Oh,
on that.
it was probably, oh gosh, it was millions and millions and millions of dollars. I mean, to the tune of in $100 million organization, $100 million sales organization, it was probably, if I remember correctly, it was approaching $30 million of lost
Okay.
opportunity.
Right. Which is actually directly correlates to the jolt effect volume of
Mhm.
lost opportunity that gets into that constipated stage in the middle of the funnel
Mhm.
because the seller misreads a moment.
That's
And
right.
the reason they misread a moment more often than not is because they put their agenda before the customers. They have an I win first mentality,
Mhm. Mhm.
which the buyer's brain for the last billion years has evolved to keep it safe.
That's
Now,
right.
about a quarter of a billion years ago, when mammals appeared on the scene after the big meteor strike, they developed this tendency to go out looking for stuff and looking for novelty. Now we've got both those systems at work in all of our brains and our buyers' brains, our employees' brains, our team's brains, our partners. And everyone filters when they're making decisions using this syntax, as far as I can see. And I'd love if you can tell me that I'm wrong, because I'm basing quite a lot of my future on this, which is, first of all, we filter for risk.
Uh-huh.
If I perceive a risk or I am uncertain, I will not proceed. And therefore, what will happen is deals will stall. We know from the Jolt effect research that 52% of the 60% of pipeline that ends up in close loss no decision, i.e., 31% of all opportunities you have paid for and pursued, end up in close loss no decision because you, as a seller, misread a moment.
Yes.
Now, what if you just stop misreading that moment?
Mhm.
There's literally a doubling of close rate.
That's right.
That's a doubling of the bottom of your pipeline.
Well, yeah, and what I see is too many salespeople being salespeople and not being teachers, trusted advisors, and problem solvers, right? Uh,
Absolutely. Which then brings us to the second filter. After risk is opportunity cost.
mhm, mhm,
Am I using my time, my money, my resources in the best way possible? And
mhm.
if there is any hesitation at that point, I will go out, because the only reason anyone can, I've so far not come up with any reason other than this. And the only reason you speak to a salesperson is because you have an important decision to make and you don't want to make the wrong one. You want to
Right.
make the right one. That's our job. The moment we start making it about us and making it about our quota and getting it over the line this month because we need to please our boss, it becomes a selfish act. It becomes tactical. It becomes a technique. And their brain, which is designed to protect against threats, now sees us as one of them and pushes us out.
We get commission breath. That's what I tell
Exactly.
people. We get commission breath, and the customer can always pick up and smell commission breath.
The third and least important of all, and Charlie Green talks about it in terms of the trusted advisor and the trust equation, is credibility is the least important thing. The value piece is the least important part of the equation. What they really need, first of all, is an opportunity for intimacy, to create a human to human connection. Now, this is why I'm so excited by this conversation, Jeff. You can't even begin to understand. What you're talking about here is having really good self mastery, self awareness, understanding the
Mhm.
effect you have on others. So let's start with that. And let's start at a leadership. In fact, let's start at the investors level. Their level of self awareness and the effect that they have and the decisions they have rippling through the organization with those unintended consequences. How can we get them to be more consequential in their critical thinking?
So I think leaders need to understand what happens in the sales process. They need to understand if they've never carried a bag, it's difficult for them to understand what the bag carriers go through every day, both in the selling process, but also in the delivering client value and what obstacles stand in the organization that get in front of them many times. So I think leaders need to walk a mile in the shoes of the salespeople, the bag carriers.
Again, we've conducted a selling aptitude test and we've had 100 or 200 responses. It's not massive,
Mhm.
but the two things that really stand out: lack of sales and marketing integration. 7%
Oh,
say that
yeah.
they have an integrated sales and marketing function, which blows my mind because
And
93% are saying they don't.
and of the 7% that say they do, I would challenge that about half of them actually do.
I was about to move on to that because this ties into the next one, which is the most depressing one, which is, I think it was 2.1% have any executive involvement.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, really? How deaf and blind are these people to the reality of what their people are facing?
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just insane,
It
isn't
is
it?
insane. It's very much insane.
Tell me, because you're an investor, it's actually your money.
Mhm.
Okay. You're the general partner on this?
One of 3 general partners.
One of three GPs. Okay. So basically, you're 220 and the carry and everything else. It's really
Mhm.
important to you. And it's your actual money. And you have to attract other people's money.
That's right.
And you have massive liabilities and responsibilities to those people, especially if you want them to come back and invest in the next fund.
That's exactly right.
looking at it through that lens objectively, how can anyone encourage their people to put the top of the funnel and make it cold and then have a 0.2% win rate
Yeah,
on a go-to-market motion?
that's right.
I mean,
It makes
please.
no sense. Yeah, it makes no sense. I mean, customer acquisition, if you don't invest in your customer acquisition process, which first starts with understanding what's the natural customer acquisition process, and then building a marketing capability that supports the customer acquisition process. I see so many marketing people who are a great marketing person. And I've said this before. I'm working with a client right now that's looking for a VP of marketing. And I said, you get the right person, the right marketing professional, they will be one of the smartest business people in your organization versus someone who just gets enamored with logos and design standards and colors. So there's the marketing communication aspect, but that's such a very small aspect of marketing. I'm talking about the business of marketing, the actual financial business of marketing, which not a lot of people really understand and execute against.
Everything that touches the customer is marketing.
That's right.
Sales is a subset of marketing.
Mhm.
Invoicing is a subset of marketing. We seem to have completely forgotten. The customer has become the end of this long chain of abuse and a forgotten afterthought. I was at a conference yesterday, which was full of fashion marketing specialists. And it was all about data, it was all about making the sale. And what flabbergasted me was the customer almost didn't come into the conversation until I provoked it. Now, maybe I'm being unfair, but the reality is where you have quarterly reporting, where you measure pointless metrics like number of dials, number of proposals, number of demos. I'm interested in leading indicators. I'm more interested in a second meeting than I am a first, because
Right.
any can sell a first meeting. And if you go from the back of the alphabet, chances are they're not quite so used to being pilloried and hassled. If you focus on trying to create the conditions where the buyer is seeking you out, where there is bilateral communication, where they are proactively driving the communication, the third renewal is a really interesting one. Time to value.
Mhm.
None of these things appear to be measured by any funds that I've come across, but time in front of the customer. I mean, it's as low as 12%. Actually, I think it's even lower in most cases because only 27% of SaaS salespeople hit quota last year.
Yeah.
And the big thing they keep whining about is we're not able to get in front of people.
I tell salespeople all the time, if you want to double your income, double the amount of time you stand face to face with a qualified prospect or a customer.
And ask the right question when you do that.
Absolutely.
Not how do we put more crap in at the top?
That's
Because
right.
every bad lead that comes from the TAM that is not ICP
Mhm.
means work that will result in either no sale and only cost, an opportunity cost, or worse, a sale to the wrong
That's
customer
right.
who will then churn and lose you even more money.
Yeah. It's in healthcare, they call it uncompensated care.
Well, the cost of pursuit, the hidden cost of pursuit, is the second highest hidden cost in any business.
Yeah.
The highest is wrong hires.
Mhm.
So again, we seem to promote people who were effective at being individual contributors in another era. And
I observed that in healthcare 30 years ago, where the most technically proficient practitioner got promoted into leadership. I saw that over the course of a decade working in a technology database data management company. The most technically proficient, they get promoted into leadership, and many times, oftentimes, technical proficiency and true natural leadership capabilities are antithetical to one another.
they are, because as an individual contributor, your job is to deliver your individual target.
That's right.
As a manager, your job is to get the entire team over the line together as expected,
Mhm.
as you promised you would. And those are quite different. So, what tends to happen is you get the hero manager or you get the persecutor manager, and they have a tendency to think that it's my way or the highway. And this is where there's a really interesting structural tension at work, which is the unspoken, unwritten, impossible contracts between boss and team member. Team member says, boss, I want you to hire me, look after me, train me, coach me, develop me, pay me well. When I'm down, pick me up. When I'm up, pat me on the back, pay me really well. And we both know that when the time comes, you should step aside because I got more talent in my little finger than you do in your entire body. Oh, and by the way, I want you to make all the decisions. So when it goes wrong, it's your fault.
Yep.
And the manager's unreasonable contract is you're mine, I own you. You do what the hell I tell you. Your only function in life is to help me be successful, make me look good. When you talk about me behind my back, you say wonderful things. In fact, all of my faults and failings are lovable quirks. And I'm the best boss that you've ever had, the best boss in this company by far, and possibly the best boss that's ever walked the face of the planet.
It's interesting talking about that individual contributor becoming a manager. When I made the move from being a bag carrier to being a sales manager, I still needed to feed my capabilities for doing deals. So what I would do is I would open the deal. I would still do my selling skills and open the deal and start the conversation. Then I would bring in more junior salespeople and hand the deal off to them to kind of get them jump started in the actual deal making process. And that helped me meet my individual contribution needs, but it also fulfilled my leadership responsibilities of bringing younger salespeople along.
So, what were the questions you were asking yourself prior to making those decisions? Because one of the things that I've noticed is the people who can actually stand up for themselves have often had a mentor who said, Jeff, what would you do if?
Mhm. I think the fact that I studied successful people academically for a number of years, literally as a professor at a university, that's what led me into the corporate world. I think I walked in with a degree of awareness, maybe not as much self-awareness when I was young and brash, but I had an awareness of what constituted success and what differentiated successful people, and that helped me develop the self-awareness a lot more quickly.
Okay, so again, one of the things that I've noticed is the best leaders tend to have quite a lot of range. And I'm very curious what you took from your academic life in terms of analysis and being able to question and think your way through a problem rather than just simply throw mud and money at it.
The first thing that I learned at the very top level of the analysis was that academic credentials, letters behind one's name, length of time spent in traditional educational endeavors in no way correlate to success in the real world. Just like the entrance exam, we have an entrance exam in the United States called the American College Testing, the ACT, and it is what 90% of colleges make their entrance decisions on, their admission decisions on. Well, it's been proven over and over and over that the ACT does not correlate to college success no more than college success contributes or correlates to life success.
Yeah.
So understanding that was kind of the first and foremost. And then beyond that was that there at the very highest level, there were two sets of behaviors that really differentiated successful people from highly successful people from marginally successful people. And those were the degree to which I could walk the tightrope between the delivery of consistent results and the development and maintenance of strong long-term relationships. If I focus on results at the expense of relationships, I will experience some wild success very, very quickly until I alienate everyone around me who's responsible for helping me maintain those results, and then I lose them both. By the same token, if I focus on relationships at the expense of results, people will love me for a while until they lose respect for me because I can't do what I say I'm going to do when I say I'm going to do it.
I'm really intrigued by this because I've developed a model using the iron triangle where two of the sides are relationship and revenue. My third one is strategy. Most people's idea of strategy is a bunch of financial numbers on a spreadsheet. That isn't strategy for anyone who thinks it is, by the way. Um,
Agreed.
and within the iron triangle model, we've got the inputs and the outcomes.
Mhm.
Well, in terms of revenue, we've got behavior, but we have zero control over the outcome because the
Mhm.
customer decides when they sign the check. The only thing we can do is create the conditions that make it optimal for them to decide in our favor
Mhm.
when they are ready. So that means that we have to choreograph our pipeline. If we're spending all of our time faffing around in the cold market trying to drag people, let's face it, they spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year keeping us out. So the analogy is you have to run over the open ground as they fire arrows at you, swim through the shark filled moat, climb up a wall as they pour fiery oil on top of you. And then you have to hack your way through bars and then take someone hostage so that you can tell them about something they're not interested in, the timing is bad about, or isn't relevant to them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, my thinking is, and I was, hinting at it with the academic question, is well, wouldn't it be but far better to just get invited in through the front door as a welcome guest? And then I can save myself. But what that means is I can do away with the top of the funnel
Mhm.
activities. I mean,
Mhm.
think about it.
Mhm.
All those costs, the data like Cognism and Zoom Info, the technology stack that is what, 10 to 15K per SDR,
Mhm. Mhm.
and the hangover that it creates. And yet we've got CRM systems where you're lucky to have 20% of the data in there of any use, but it's buried among a load of rubbish. Then you attract all the wrong people into the top of the funnel, and they then have to be followed up. And every one of those creates a tariff, a
Mhm.
workload for the salesperson. Well, if it's 6 to 11 follow ups for a warm inbound, which it was before things turned in February of 2023, I'm hearing now that 18 to 21 follow ups in some industries. That's just to get the first call in. If you have a multiple stakeholder, multiple month sales cycle, people are going to come in and out. The stakeholders will sometimes be engaged and others won't. So we have to choreograph it. So our medium term pipeline is delivering consistency, but you can't ever get there if you're running around after 2 or 3 thousand accounts trying to cover all of them in the hope that you can book some meetings so that you can make a meeting quota. That's not the job to be done
That's
any
right.
more than a digital advert is about getting click throughs. It's about getting paying customers who stay.
That's right. That's right. Paying customers who stay. That's the big one. And it takes 1/15 of the effort to get a client from a referral as it does from a cold call, right? 1/15. Think about that. I mean, that's significant. And it takes about 1/10 of the effort to get a repeat sale from a customer that you did a good job with in the first place.
What's really interesting is you can win back on average 26%. But most people won't go for win back because they're afraid. What if they get narky with us? What if they don't like us? What if it ends up in conflict? Well, outsource those interviews if you have to, but
Right.
do a win back campaign and get a 1 in 4 win rate. My favorite stories, I've got two, and they are brilliant. Teddy Peck works for a company called ICIS. They do commodity data for plastics. Okay. In the last year, he's reduced their churn rate from 83% and their retention is now 97. Sorry,
Wow.
82% to 97. So every month he delivers 15% more profit at zero cost. Okay. They've been running Winback for the last year. They win over 1 in 4. Okay. Tom Williams, when he was in the US health sector as a
Mhm.
CEO of a hospital, they did Winback.
Hmm.
They have a 90% win rate, okay, win back rate,
Mhm.
but they also plugged their 83 to 97%, I think it was. So they had a 14% month on month addition. So they stopped the leaky bucket. That's the best thing. If you can stop
Absolutely.
a 15% churn rate means you have to replace half your customers every 3 years. You've
That's
seen
right.
how much work goes in. So, as an investor, what would you say to other investors about that top of the funnel piece?
I would say that when they're you say what I would say to other investors is if they're not assessing the sales and marketing process as part the client acquisition process as part of their due diligence in reviewing the investment, they're not mitigating the significant part of their risk to their investment.
So again, for anybody who wants to be able to do that due diligence, please get in touch. If you don't want to work with me, I've got a dozen people that I
Yeah.
can put you to, Jeff being one of them. Getting it right is so important. And think about it. If you acquire a company, what's the potential for them to cross sell and co sell with other
Mhm.
companies in your portfolio? Your background, if I recall correctly, is ecosystem. So I really want to get
Mhm.
onto that because that's my
Yep.
big. So talk to me about how you can sell as an ecosystem and what the payoffs and upsides are of doing it that way.
Yeah. Well, before we jump into that, from my investment and our investment thesis, so to speak, we don't invest in any companies that we don't think that we have a good chance of helping as a result of either our expertise, our network connections, potential clients, or what have you. So we use ecosystem in our own investment thesis, so to speak, right? What is the ecosystem that we're bringing this potential portfolio into, and can it be accretive to them, or can they be accretive to other members of that ecosystem?
Absolutely. The whole hypothesis of accretive investment, you've got to have a listen to or look at if you are a salesperson, if you're a leader or a manager, and if you're an investor. Accretive investment. I worked with a client of mine, Callum Lang, and in 3 years, he went from zero to 300 million with zero money.
Hmm.
Now, this is really very cool because what they did was they reverse engineered, reversed into a failed PLC. Then they traded public shares for private shares and they only bought profitable companies. Those profitable companies added value to the public shares. The founders got an instant boost and they stayed on. And that's the important thing. There's no
Mhm.
point having the talent and having them leave,
That's
and
right.
don't try and dilute them to the point where they don't have any incentive to stay. And how do you not create hell on earth? Because that's the other thing, especially, I mean, you chap who's been around a bit like me. So I'm
Mhm.
guessing this is your sixth or seventh, maybe even your eighth recession. In the last several, what really terrible decisions have you seen investors make that rippled through the organization through leadership and that result in the unintended negative consequences they were hoping to avoid by making the bad decision?
It always amazes me at how investors can create a bubble, how they can get completely enamored with a technology before it's ready to go to customers, before it's solving customer problems, and overinflate the valuations of those companies or a complete sector, only to have it crash a few months or years later.
It feels like those people are more like day traders and they're not really thinking long term. If you adopt that short term thinking in your prospecting activity, then it will be felt by the customer. As a seller, what been conscious of for a long time, and I really struggled with it for many years, was how do I not present any perception of risk to my buyer's brain by not being selfish?
Mhm.
Well, letting go of the need to try and convince, the need to try and get the deal done. You know, time kills deals as they're rattling away in my head. ABC, always be closing. You know,
Yeah.
these tropes that we've learned. If you look at the neuroscience and you look at the behavioral psychology research on this, we actually create anticipated buyer's remorse. That's why 31% of all pipeline ends up in close loss, no decision. Create a moment of uncertainty in the buyer's brain where they suddenly think and imagine for a moment, what if it goes wrong?
Mhm. Mhm.
Why would you do that? We've institutionalized it. We create contempt and disgust. And actually, what we do, and I've interviewed probably 100 plus CFOs and heads of procurement, those sorts of folk. And in every instance, two things they've said. First thing is, if you try and put me under pressure with some false deadline, I'll not only not buy then, but I will bank it. And when I'm ready, I'll come back and I'll ask for double that the next time. And the
Exactly.
second thing is they have never bought the cheapest.
Yeah, that's right. I always tell my clients that kind of the first interaction with them is, look, I'm not going to try to sell you anything. What I'd like to do is spend some time together, to see if it makes sense for us to work together, and that you're confident in the value that we can achieve together. And if you're not, we walk away friends. If you are, then I think it could be the start of a great relationship. But I don't know yet, and you don't know yet. So let's explore it together.
And this, I think, speaks to your intent. When we're prospecting, when I'm teaching my clients to prospect, we have a few points of difference. The first one is we are prospecting for a customer for life.
Mhm.
I'm not interested in a transaction. I'm not interested in a meeting.
That's right.
I've got a client who runs an agency. When he got sick, he abdicated responsibility. And as a result, people started taking pay per click. They're a full funnel agency. And that's what they should stick to, because
Mhm.
that's what they are brilliant at. They
Mhm.
can't compete at the bottom of the market. There's
No.
no point. They're not set up for that. It's really important also that we understand that when we're establishing those ground rules, what we're looking at is the medium term pipeline, not the short term. We're
Mhm.
not prospecting for people who can buy now or
Right.
even in the next 3 or 6 months. We're prospecting for people who are going to become active looking for a solution in the next 6 to 36 months.
Mhm.
Because if you choreograph that correctly and you're an established business, you can easily cover that period
Mhm.
whilst you're waiting for those that stuff to kick in by going hot instead of cold. Referrals close 1 in 6
Mhm.
without training. I mean, that's a 17, 18% conversion rate
For sure.
compared with between 0.2% and 3%. I mean, why would you want to work 5 times harder for the same amount of money?
Well, yeah. I mean, so you've talked about three kind of things there, or three types of sales. There's the repeat cross upsell, which is going to produce greater returns. There's the referrals that's going to produce much greater returns on effort, and then there's the win backs. Right? We could almost, with an established business, almost spend 100% of our marketing and selling budgets on those three things, and deliver much better returns for our company and our shareholders.
The best thing about Winback is you've already paid for the lead. The average ROI on Winback is 32 to 182x.
Yeah.
And that's for B2B and B2C.
Mhm.
Um, so again, I think this is really interesting because uh, this conference I was at yesterday was really all about the consumer. But B2B has become more and more like the consumer market. A lot of SaaS is basically bought by managers on a credit card. So you need to think as if you're marketing to consumers. And I think now there's more and more emphasis on community. We're hearing community's dead, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's rubbish. That never goes away. What I've noticed, because I look at the top 4% of performers worldwide,
Mhm.
and they did not miss a beat. When things changed in February 23, they continued to hit quota. In
Mhm.
fact, their pipelines are brimming
Mhm.
because they stuck with the fundamentals, the meta skills of being decent human beings, showing
That's right.
up with the intent of serving, being the buyer's ally, never sacrificing the lifetime relationship for
Mhm.
an individual moment of gratification or advantage.
I call that intent counts more than technique.
Yeah,
If I demonstrate an authentic intent for their well-being and for their good, then that's going to supersede any selling technique that I can come up with.
and you've hit the nail right on the head here, which is the moment your intent is about what I can do to you or what I can get from you, I have weaponized the technique. And this is where we see the weaponization of bonding and rapport, matching and mirroring. We see the weaponization of discovery. Tell me this, in what universe does a BANT question ever help the customer by empowering them, giving them clarity, advancing them towards making the right decision? Well,
That's right. It's very self-serving. Now, to that end, I would agree with you that it's self-serving the way that it's executed.
mhm.
But I, as a salesperson, have to also understand whether there's a real opportunity there or not. Right.
Absolutely. But that is really down to learning how to ask questions so that the buyer volunteers this information and we're
That's right.
not trying to squeeze it out of them. so that we can meet our medic requirements for the
Agreed.
CRM. So that's the other thing I wanted to talk to you about as well. And sorry for jumping around, but they're all interrelated. Um, CRM is meant to help salespeople sell more often to more people more easily. I see CRM as basically a really bad way of giving the illusion of control to middle management.
Oh,
Uh,
I've said before, most CRMs are sold to salespeople as tools to help them sell more, but they're completely designed to help managers govern their activity.
so again, to quote Steve Jobs, there's little point hiring very intelligent people and then telling them what to do. Um,
Yeah.
our job as managers is to empower our people to make the decisions. So
Mhm.
how do we get that message filtering down all the way through from the investors, through the board, through leadership, through management, through to the salespeople, through to the customer, that it's all about empowering other people to make the decision and to do so well?
I think it has to start at the top. What I have found is that as when I was a senior executive in a publicly traded company, and I would say, we ought to do this or we ought to do that, or this is, and many times it was just a thought I had in the shower. And I'm making kind of a flippant statement of, yeah, this is what we
Yeah.
really ought to do. There were throngs of people lined up behind me to execute blindly on that. And so I had to be very, very careful with what I said.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so yeah,
yeah.
and I think the top leaders of an organization need to be very, very careful about the culture. It's about the culture that they build. Culture's gotten a bad rap because there are a lot of people who think that culture is just a set of core values that are beautifully designed and put on a banner and hung on the wall.
And
Uh,
forgot.
that's that's this amount of culture, right? Culture is everything. Culture is what we say, what we don't say, how we act, how we don't act, the processes we have, the processes we don't have. It's all
Who
of those
we
things.
hire.
Whom we hire and how we onboard them, and culture is what a client feels when they walk away from an engagement with us. It's what an employee feels when they walk into the building and what they feel when they walk out. It's all of those things. And so being the leader, one of our single greatest responsibilities is to create a culture of excellence, and then to hold ourselves first and foremost to that culture of excellence, number one. And number two, to build an organization where other managers, other leaders, other managers, and employees live within those cultural confines as well.
Amen. That would be a really good point to end the show, but I'm not going to, because I've got at least another 10 minutes agreed with you. So I'm going to milk you for everything I've got. Well, so tell me this. We're now going into a period which appears to be quite uncertain.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to sellers to ensure that they don't then become part of the problem and trigger their buyers to perceive them as a risk?
Now, don't change. Don't be beholden to your circumstances. Continue your demonstration of positive intent. Continue helping your customer solve problems. Continue giving value before you ask for anything in return. Continue with those strong, ethical, foundational things that you've done for years that have made you successful. The circumstances shouldn't require you to have to change how you approach your work, your customers, and the value that you bring them.
Okay. So, and that's brilliant for the top 4%. For
Mhm.
those people who've come through a culture where it was really about the numbers game, it's all about making quota this month come hell or high water. And you've grown up in cultures where you've been asked to do things that you know inherently don't sit comfortably with your values. You've probably even gone home and numbed in order to overcome the shame and disgust. What advice would you give to those people who know that they're now starting to feel the pressure and they feel that they have to behave in that way and they've got to fit in? How can they walk that tightrope?
I think they start by deciding the change that they need to make, right? And they may not be able to make it overnight. Go sit down with some of those top 4% of performers. Go have conversations with them. I think we do too much work of trying to teach people how to be mentors and not enough work trying to teach young people how to find and utilize mentors to the best outcome. And so, oh, by the way, having a mentor in the best of circumstances probably never includes the question, will you be my mentor? It's, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee? I've noticed that you're highly successful at doing where I want to get in my career. I observe and I aspire to the kinds of relationship that you have with your customers. And I'd love to just buy you coffee, pick your brain, and see if I could learn a few things from you.
I've got a slightly cheekier version of that, which does involve would you be my mentor, but I think you might like it, which is Jeff, cheeky ask. Would you be my mentor for 20 minutes a month? The rules are I will bring you the one thing that I've been struggling with all month, the three things I've tried to do to fix it, and why I think they didn't work. And then you can help me with a quick and dirty response to identify what I've missed. And then anytime I fail to come prepared or anytime I fail to do what I say I'll do, then you can fire me. What do you say? And then you send them a link. Now, if you send that out to about 20, you'll get around 12 say yes on average in my
Mhm.
experience. Now, the key, I learned this from watching Darren Brown, who's a mentalist, beat 7 grandmasters at chess, never having played chess before.
Mhm.
So he had 12 of them, and he played the second move to the highest ranking grandmaster,
Mm.
then played their move to the next person, and they then played the response, blah, 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 blah. And
Mm.
so he ended up beating 7 of them by playing the one game because they followed a pattern. Well, we can do the same thing in sales and marketing. We can
Yeah.
work out what works and what doesn't work, and then we can create that cascade.
Well, I loved everything about your approach after the will you be my mentor for 20 minutes a month. And so here's what I would offer to you. When I say, will you do something, I am taking the accountability and responsibility and I'm placing it on you versus playing it on me. So I would suggest taking that will you be and saying, may I pick? May I pick your brain? May I ask you a few questions? May I learn from your experience? Because I then keep the responsibility and the accountability on my shoulders then, and I don't
I
transfer
love
it to someone else.
Thank you. It was worth it just for that. Seriously, that's what I live for this podcast. And
Yeah.
it's the synthesis, it's the little iterative improvements that make things better.
But I
And that,
loved every other aspect of it because every other aspect of it demonstrated that the accountability was on me. I just perhaps if you get 12 out of 25 with your approach, take our combined approach and you might get 24 out of 25 saying yes.
I'm up for that. Anything that means that I can do less but better on purpose is a
There you
win.
go. Yeah, for
Our
sure.
company motto is double the money, half the work.
Love it. Love it. Love it.
And Jeff, we've come to time. I don't want to overstay my welcome. 2 final questions. What would you recommend people read, watch, or listen to in order to take our conversation a little bit deeper?
Yeah, I think they have to start with understanding kind of that self-awareness that we talked about earlier. Look at where their shortcomings are and build a plan to close the gap on where they want to be versus where they are. Once they build that plan, then they have to search for the resources. I think your podcast is great. I think the Innovation Junkies podcast is great. By the way, that's the podcast that Jeff Amaran and I host. I think in terms of books, Brian Tracy wrote a book years ago called The Unlimited Sales Success, and it's probably 2 decades old, but it's got some real basic fundamental intent counts more than technique kinds of selling development in there that I think is good. And then I think they need to seek out those people that they can pick their brains, and relationships and experiences are far better mechanisms for learning than trainings or readings in many instances.
James Muir's new book, Unblock Deals, is really good. Bob Berg's The Go Giver is a
I
good.
love that. I've got a half a dozen copies on my desk that I give, or on my bookshelf that I give away.
Excellent. And the other one who I'm a huge fan of, Pat Lencioni, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
And I love his advantage, the advantage.
The advantage. Well, I haven't yet come across a book that you couldn't take every single one of them and think, I wish I'd written it.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah. Jeff, how can people get hold of you?
Couple of ways. I'm very active on LinkedIn. They can always find me at jeffstandridge.com or at innovationjunkie.com.
Wonderful. And in terms of Caldron Capital, what sort of investors are you looking for?
So we generally are looking at tech or tech-enabled companies that are about $2 million if they're on a annual recurring revenue kind of model. $2 million if they're a product or service non-recurring revenue, probably $4 million of annual run rate, and a good strong management team that knows their business, knows their client acquisition process, and has that intent that we talked about of serving their customers.
Lovely. Jeff, thank you so much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Marcus. I really, really appreciate it and enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. I'm fascinated that, I mean, there's so much common ground here, but you mentioned the VP of marketing. I have someone for you who I can highly recommend, who I know.
Okay.
And the other thing is when people are looking at the market at the moment, I think one of the big problems is they are not aligned with where their ICP is on their journey. I would recommend Demand Side Sales by Bob Mester, Moesta, and Clay Christensen's, is it The Innovator's Dilemma?
The Innovator's Dilemma.
Yeah,
Clayton Christensen he's a sage in my line of work. So love everything that he's got.
absolutely. Excellent. Well, but Bob was apprenticed to him.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Clay in Bob's work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate
Um,
you.
Likewise. So if you're having a hard time at the moment, at the bottom of the blurb is a link to the selling aptitude test.
Okay.
We look at four qualities: your pipeline certainty, your selling aptitude compared against the top 4%. You don't come out looking pretty. It's the ugly mirror. Okay.
Yep.
No one looks pretty when they take the test.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that you develop a pathway to improve so that you iteratively get towards them. Two other things that it will spit out are your seller safety score and
Mm-hmm.
your buyer safety score. Because if you're showing up and you're stressed and you're projecting, if we can address that, that's an instant win, and you will start seeing pipeline improve and you'll close more. And if you're creating conditions where buyers do not feel safe, that's also a problem. So take the selling aptitude test. If you want to, then you can book half an hour with me for free. I'll just give you feedback. At the end of that, if you want
Okay.
to talk to me about coaching, raise your hand and tell me. But you're just going to get half an hour of honest, raw, unvarnished feedback.
Good
I'm not going
stuff.
to be unpleasant about it, but it's going to be tough. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling.
You
Bye.
you as well. Take care. Bye bye.